While talking with my husband at a party, I suddenly felt a strong grab. When I turned my head, my affair partner grabbed me in front of my husband, and now I'm facing the consequences in the worst way possible. Hi, my name is Lisa, and I am a 27-year-old beautician. I own a hair salon where I make beautiful hair for my clients. I love what I do, and I'm very good at it. The name of my soon-to-be ex-husband is Tony. He is a 30-year-old accountant. Tony and I have been married for 4 years and have known each other for 6 years. We met at an event and got an instant liking for each other. I'm ashamed to say this, but I have been cheating on my husband for almost 2 years now. Tony and I never had issues that made me stop liking or loving him. Maybe I fell out of love because I don't really know what even happened that I started cheating on him. I honestly don't have any genuine reason for my infidelity. It just happened, and I'm not proud of it. The aftermath of my infidelity isn't funny. Tony practically made my life a living hell. I have been trying all my best to make him forgive me, but his mind is made up. To make matters worse, his family members don't want me to come any closer to my husband. Tony, on the other hand, isn't helping matters. He has told me countless times not to come anywhere near him or come over to the house. My husband sent me packing without thinking about where I would go. I never knew he could be this cruel and heartless. Tony knew I had no relatives or friends in the town where we lived, but he still chased me out of the house. The most shocking and heartbreaking part of it was that my husband took away the only thing that was fetching me money, which was my hair salon. He was the one who bought the space for me when we were dating and handed over the keys to me when we got married. Tony saw how passionate I was about my craft, and he decided to surprise me with the space. I had no idea about it, though before the wedding we spoke about what I would be doing after the wedding because we were moving to a new town, which meant I would have to start all over. Tony and I were not in the same town during courtship. In fact, it was more like a distant relationship. In my town, I had a space where I had clients that came to get their hair done. So Tony and I discussed how I would continue it because I made it clear that I won't be a full-time housewife. I'm never the type that likes staying at home doing nothing. I like to get myself busy with work. When I mean work, I don't mean house chores because I don't like repeating the same thing every day. So guys, Tony told me he would do something about it. A few weeks after I moved into Tony's house officially, he surprised me with the salon. At that time, I was the happiest person. My new space wasn't just bigger but more beautiful than the previous one I had. Tony was a very supportive husband to me. He never asked me for any penny in running the household. He took care of my needs and provided everything I needed. But unfortunately, my husband seized the keys to my salon and permanently closed it down. Everything I had in my salon was all sold out at a discounted price. Tony knew how much I worked hard in getting those things in the salon. All the money I made was invested into the salon to keep it running, but all of that has just been scattered. I was doing so well before I messed things up for myself. It's so embarrassing writing this right now. Everyone seemed to be on Tony's side. Honestly, I would have done the same if anyone had done what I did. My husband had shown me nothing but love and care, and all I had to pay him back was cheating. No, guys, I really messed up. I just hope Tony can forgive me. I wouldn't say my infidelity was intentional because I'm a grown-up adult that's supposed to know what's right and wrong. Yes, it wasn't intentional at first. But I had all the time to stop, but I chose not to, and went with the flow. At that time, Tony and I were just 2 years in marriage, but I started going out with a total stranger. Guys, I met my affair partner at a supermarket. That day, we had run out of groceries in the house, and I stepped out to restock. I got to the supermarket, picked the things we needed at that moment, and proceeded to pay at the counter. At that time, I had no idea that someone was admiring me from a far distance. This stranger watched me till I was done and came over to the counter and offered to pay for the groceries. At first, I refused because I knew those types of people would ask to get your contact details after that gesture. The stranger insisted and then paid for it. After the payment was done, he even helped me to take it to the car. That was where we introduced ourselves, and I got to know his name. His name is Roy. Roy was a year older than I am. Roy and I had a few minutes talking, which was just expressing how grateful I was to him for footing the bills. He told me he would only accept my appreciation if I would go on a coffee date with him. Roy also told me he meant no harm and that it was just a way of getting to know me and would like us to be friends. I accepted and we exchanged contacts. A few days later, Roy called me, but I didn't pick any of his calls or reply to any of his messages. I can't really remember why I did that. Roy didn't stop calling or texting me. After a week later, I decided to respond, but I wasn't fully invested in the conversation. We were just cordial and nothing extra. At some point, I started liking Roy because of his friendly nature. Our chat started getting exciting. In fact, it got to a point I looked forward to chatting and calling Roy. Roy didn't stop asking me to go on a coffee date with him. Just one day, I decided to give in to his request. I made sure that my husband wouldn't be around on that day, which he wasn't. Tony had gone out of town for a wedding that fateful day. We were supposed to have gone together, but I gave the excuse of not feeling too well so I could go out with Roy. Tony fell for it and even wanted to cancel the trip if I wouldn't be there to attend the wedding with him, but I insisted on him going and assured him that I would be fine. Tony left that day with the thought that I was sick at home and resting. Meanwhile, I spent the rest of the day having coffee with Roy at a coffee shop. After we were done, we went sightseeing and had lots of fun together. My husband's trip was to last for 2 days. I spent those 2 days with Roy. After our first outing, we went to a proper date at a restaurant. There, we had a conversation about a few things and used that opportunity to get to know each other. Roy also confessed his feelings for me and asked me to be his girlfriend. The 2 years that Roy and I have been together, I didn't tell him that I was married. Roy was unaware about my marital status. Anytime I wanted to open up to him about it, something would come up, and I won't get the chance to tell him. At that time, I felt like I was playing 2 grown-up men at the same time. One was my husband, who completely trusted me and was unaware about my infidelity. The other one was Roy, who had feelings for me and wanted to take things to another level. Roy even had the intention of getting married to me. I took advantage of my husband's trust and Roy's feelings for me. During that trip, my husband kept calling to check on me. He was worried about me and blamed himself for leaving me home all by myself without anybody looking after me. Tony had no idea that I was literally living my best life. Roy and I even booked a hotel and spent the night together. It felt like I was having a mini vacation at that time. So guys, everything was moving on well between Roy and I. We were going out together for 2 years without my husband's knowledge. How I was able to do it is something I still don't understand. There were times Roy slept over at our house and we even went out to public places together. I didn't have to worry about being caught because Tony was mostly out of town for seminars and we had no relatives or close friends I could bump into. But one day Tony left town as usual and I had invited Roy over to spend the night. After a few days, my husband returned back home. Initially, the trip was to last for 5 days, but he added extra 3 days because he went to visit our families. When Tony was coming back home, he didn't inform me because he wanted to surprise me. Guys, that day Roy had spent the night and we were relaxing over a chilled wine when we heard a knock on the door. I needed no one to tell me at that moment that it was Tony, so I asked Roy to pack up his things and leave. Roy was confused at that moment and asked why I was being uncomfortable all of a sudden. I just told him there was no time for any explanation and I would explain everything to him when the time comes, but that at that moment he needed to leave. Roy asked who was at the door and I told him it was my parents and they wouldn't be happy seeing us the way we were. At that moment, Roy wasn't satisfied with everything I told him, but he agreed to leave. I made him use the back door and made sure he had left through the escape route in the backyard. Immediately he left, I made sure to put the place in order as fast as I could before I opened the door for Tony. After that, I opened the door and I was panting really hard. My husband asked if everything was okay and why I took so long to get the door. I lied to my husband that I was doing something upstairs and apologized for keeping him waiting. From the look on Tony's face, I knew he didn't buy what I told him. All what I was saying at that moment was not making any sense. I was mixing things up and Tony knew something was fishy but couldn't figure it out. To make my husband stop asking me any other questions at that time, I went closer to him and gave him a hug and collected his luggages. My husband came in reluctantly and had this unsatisfactory look on his face, but I acted normal. At that moment, I couldn't care less about anything knowing that my husband didn't get to meet Roy and I on the same couch together. I was happy Roy also didn't get to know that I was married that day. Luckily for me, Tony and I were not the type to hang portraits of ourselves on the wall. If not, Roy would have learned about my marital status, and it wouldn't have been funny at all. I loved what I shared with Roy and wasn't ready to break up with him. In fact, I tried my best and made sure to not let him know that I was married. He never suspected anything. So guys, when my husband got inside and went to freshen up, I went to the kitchen to fix him something to eat. Roy kept calling me non-stop and wanted to know why I behaved the way I did to him. He even sent me text messages, but I didn't reply to any. After a few hours, I apologized to him on the phone and promised to get back to him. Guys, Roy and I didn't talk to each other after that day for like a week. The fault was from my side. I treated him like a piece of trash without giving him any valid explanation. Of course, I had to do what I did at that moment to save us both. If my husband had met us the way Roy and I were on the couch that day, it would have been a total mess. I knew what my husband was capable of doing. I ignored all of Roy's calls and he stopped calling me. At that time, I felt lonely and needed someone to keep me company, and so I decided to pay Roy a visit at his place. I got to Roy's place and told him that it was my parents that were knocking that day. Guys, Roy was really upset with me. It took time before I was able to make him forgive me. Soon we got back to how we used to be, and we continued our relationship. The bond between us grew stronger. Roy and I even went on a mini vacation together. I lied to my husband that I was going to visit a friend of mine. I was able to convince him that it had been a while since we both saw each other. My husband believed me and gave me some money to get whatever I needed for the trip. Roy and I had the best time during the vacation. We went to a lot of interesting places together and took pictures. Most of the people we met and had conversation with thought Roy and I were couples. With the way we were, it was easy to say that we were a couple. While I was having my best time, I was also worried about my husband. At that moment, I felt like what I was doing was wrong. My husband wouldn't stop checking on me to see if I was fine. Anytime my husband called, I would excuse myself from Roy's place and talk with Tony. Sometimes my husband would demand for a FaceTime call, but I kept turning him down. The few times we did FaceTime was in the bathroom. I would lock myself in there so that Roy wouldn't be on to us. That was the only way I could get to see my husband on the phone. Tony noticed the particular spot I usually hid to talk to him and asked why I was doing that, but I had to lie to him that it was the only place I could get a strong signal to talk with him. Thankfully, it wasn't a complete lie because the town we were in made it difficult to get a good signal. I used that as an excuse and my husband believed me. So guys, Roy and I spent a month there. We eventually got back home and went back to our normal lives. A few weeks after we got back to town, my husband called me and told me he wanted us to spice our relationship up. He noticed that it's been a while since we both went on a date together. My husband apologized for not having time for me and promised to change. I told Tony that there was no need for any apology, that I was also guilty of the same and wasn't complaining. We both settled things up like we had a fight, which we didn't. Honestly, at that moment, I didn't understand where my husband was driving. We were both busy with work and had no time for each other. Or let's say I was distracted by Roy and didn't give him the time he needed, but instead he was apologizing. If my husband had known about that at that moment, I would have been thrown out immediately. Well, he later did though. So guys, what my husband meant about spicing things up was for us to be going out like we used to and exploring the city together. My husband also proposed that we should try and close early from work so we can be able to spend time together, which I agreed to. A few days after that conversation, we started to reignite our relationship. Tony started closing early from work. Sometimes he would come pick me up in my salon after work and we would go to places together. Most of the time we went on dates or cinemas to watch the latest movies. Tony also didn't forget to take me to an ice cream date. My husband knew how much I loved ice cream. Our relationship started blooming like we were newly couples. I even forgot about Roy for a while. At that time I thought of what went wrong, that I started cheating on my husband. Even now, whenever I think about it, I still can't even figure it out. My husband and I never quarreled without resolving it, and Tony never did anything that got me really offended. My husband was never the type, and he would not cheat on me. Tony is everything that a lady would ask for. He got the looks and money, but he's not the type that likes going out with different ladies or the type that cheats on his wife. Honestly, I don't really deserve Tony. He trusted me so much that he got really comfortable with me. I took advantage of that and cheated on him. That's why when he learned about my infidelity, he didn't have any mercy on me. He tried everything he could to ruin my life and made sure that I wouldn't try what I did to him in my next life. My husband's revenge taught me a valuable lesson that I would never forget in a while. I was depressed for a few weeks. I cried my eyes out pleading with him to forgive me and take me back, but he didn't. So back to the road that led me here. So at the time my husband and I's relationship was blooming so well, I felt like confessing everything to him. The guilt about my infidelity was taking a toll on me, but I wasn't able to tell him. The worst part of it was when my husband and I went out on a date at a restaurant. At that moment, something was just itching me up to tell Tony and open up to him about everything. Tony noticed how restless I was and asked if I was okay, but I lied and told him I was fine and that I just wasn't comfortable and needed to use the bathroom, so I went to the bathroom to calm myself down. Just in that moment, Roy's call came in, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I gave Roy space when my husband and I decided to spice things up in our marriage. Roy and I fell apart because I wanted to focus more on my husband, but I didn't tell Roy why I behaved the way I did. I ghosted him without giving him valuable reason. When I picked Roy's call, he demanded to know why I was acting funny and ignoring his calls. I allowed him to say what he had to say before I told him that I needed some space to clear my head and would give him a call when I felt the need to. I also told him that he shouldn't call my phone so I could focus on clearing my head. I didn't even give Roy a chance to say anything, and I ended the call immediately. I quickly washed my hands, rearranged myself, and opened the door and left before I went back to meet my husband at the table. Tony asked if I was okay after visiting the restroom, so I just nodded. Tony was happy, and we proceeded to make an order. After a while, we were served and started eating. Despite my warnings, Roy didn't stop calling and texting me. In order for my husband not to suspect anything, I turned off my phone so I could enjoy the moment. After we were done, Tony proposed we visit one of his colleagues who had been asking him for a visit with me, his wife. So, that day after we were done eating, we left the restaurant and went over to Tony's friend's house. Guys, you all wouldn't believe it. Tony's colleague, Paul, shares the same neighborhood with Ro, and the only difference was that there were 5 houses in between Roy's apartment and his. So it was hard for us to see Roy that day, except if he had stepped out to throw the trash can or take a walk. I was also lucky that Paul and his wife didn't mention anything like bumping into me during the times I had visited Roy. I was so happy that everything went well, and I wasn't caught. When my husband and I were about to leave, Paul and his wife invited us to a party that they both were hosting with close friends. Tony immediately turned it down, but Paul insisted that we come. It was a Friday night party, and they had been doing it for years. I was excited about the party, guys. I won't lie. Tony saw my excitement, and he was happy to see me that way. He assured Paul that we would attend the party before we left. On our way back home, I was very happy that we didn't run into Roy because I never knew that one of my husband's colleagues was living in the same neighborhood with my affair partner. I was also happy that it was my first time meeting Paul and his wife, and they wouldn't even recognize me, even if we had bumped into each other some time past. When we got home, Paul sent us the color code for the party, which was an all-white party. Tony was never the type that liked associating himself with people, and that's why he didn't know about the Friday party. At that time, my husband and Paul were just getting to know each other despite having worked in the same space for some years. My husband hardly made an effort to form friendships, so I wasn't surprised. I was just happy that we would get to be attending a nice party. But guys, I didn't know that the party I was looking forward to would be the last party Tony and I would ever get to attend together as couples. I was excited and counted days to the party, but I didn't know what awaited me. A few days before the party, my husband and I decided to go on a spa date together. We hardly did that as a couple, and we decided to give it a trial after some time. From the spa date, we went shopping for the dress we would wear and what we were going to take as a gift for the couple. Of course, who goes to a private party without a few gifts for the hosts? Tony and I got 2 bottles of wine for the couple. After we were done, we went grocery shopping and headed back home. Before the party, Paul's wife asked for my help in helping her to put a few things together for the party, but I politely turned her down. I had my reasons, which was because my affair partner was in the same neighborhood with them and I didn't want to see him. I gave Paul's wife the excuse of being busy at the salon, which she respected. So guys, on the day of the party, I finished early from work. The party was to start by 6 p.m. that day, and I didn't want to go late to the party. But my husband was so caught up with work that he had to come back to the house almost 30 minutes before the party. When he arrived, he knew I was pissed and explained everything that happened. After hearing what he told me, I stopped being mad at him because his excuse was genuine. Tony quickly freshened up that day, and we were able to meet up with the party on time. We got to the party and we discovered that we were among the first 5 people that arrived early that day. It was a few minutes past 6 and only 5 people were present. I was shocked, but at the same time happy that I wasn't too harsh on my husband when he got back late from work. Another reason I was excited was the fact that the party was held somewhere far away from Paul's place, and the thought of not getting to bump into Roy made me happier. I felt really comfortable and decided to have fun with my husband at the party. A few minutes after our arrival, people started coming in, and before we knew it, the party started. I had a few conversations with Paul's wife, and I discovered that we were bonding really well. She was accommodating and very friendly. After some time, we played some games together, and it was very fun. Everyone present was very friendly. My husband and I were the new couple that joined the squad. Everyone else seemed to have known each other. Tony and I were given time to introduce ourselves and met everyone present. It was there Paul mentioned that one of their friends was absent at that moment, but would be joining us before the party ends. My husband and I were excited to meet the person, and I had no idea who it was. After the brief introduction, we were all asked to go to the dance floor. We danced together, and I even danced with almost everyone. Not long after, Tony went to sit down. I went over to ask him if everything was okay, and he said he was fine, just that he was a bit tired. I stood in front of Tony and we were having a conversation when I felt a sudden touch on my ass. It was just a slap at first, but after some time it turned into a strong grasp. Guys, it was so hard that I got irritated but also scared because I was confused, so I decided to turn around and see who had the audacity to act like that with me. Guys, when I turned, I got the biggest shock of my life. The person that grasped my ass was my affair partner, Roy. I was so confused and surprised to see him at the party. Roy didn't waste time and asked what I was doing at the party, and why I didn't inform him that I was coming there. At that moment, I tried everything to signal Roy that I was with my husband, but he kept spilling a lot of crazy and messy stuff. I still can't blame him, because he had no idea I had a husband to begin with. He asked me why I had been avoiding him and not taking his calls. Roy even had the nerves to say that he missed me and couldn't wait to hold me back. For a few seconds, Roy was just blabbing in front of my husband. Roy even stretched his hand to give my husband a handshake. I just kept mute, watching Roy making a fool out of himself. I didn't dare look at my husband because I was terrified of his reaction, but from Roy's expression, I could tell he was also scared. Just in that moment, Paul and his wife walked up to us and told us that Roy was the person who they were waiting for. My mouth opened up wide, and I couldn't believe what I had heard. My husband got up from where he was seated and asked me who Roy was to me. I couldn't say anything sensible. I just kept on staggering and didn't know what to say. My husband yelled so loud that we caught the attention of everyone. Roy opened his mouth to tell Tony to calm down because he was going too harsh on me. He told my husband that I was his girlfriend and asked Tony what he was to me. Immediately, Tony gave him a heavy punch on the face. Before I knew what was happening, my husband and Roy got into a heated fight. My husband gave Roy the biggest beating of his life till he passed out for a few minutes. Everyone was confused and wondered what was going on. For me, it was the worst moment in my life, and I didn't know what to do. It was there that my husband explained everything, that I was cheating on him with Roy, and told them how Roy had the audacity to grab me from behind in his presence. I pleaded with my husband to give me a chance to explain myself, but he didn't. He told me not to waste my time by coming close to him because it was over between us. Everyone at the party started staring at us. Of course, it was a big show to everyone, and we literally became the topic of that day. I couldn't believe that my plans had shattered right before my eyes, especially after I finally started to enjoy my marriage. Paul managed to calm my husband down, but he made it clear that he didn't want to see me before he left. He was so angry and said things I can't even type here. I didn't know what to do between going after my husband or taking care of Roy. Roy was completely unaware of my marital status, and I didn't know that he would be present at the party. Paul and his wife were friends with Roy. I had no idea about it. If not, I wouldn't have attended the party in the first place. My first party as a couple with Tony was messed up. I had no idea that my husband could beat someone to the extent the person would pass out. The saying that goes, "Never judge a book by its cover," is true. In fact, the saying was for my husband. Ordinarily, by looking at Tony, one would think he's not capable of doing such, but he was. I was beyond shocked that day. After much thought, I had to run after my husband. I took the available cab and went back home. I got home and met my husband with the first aid kit dressing the minor injury he had sustained during the fight. I went on my knees to plead with him to forgive me. I even asked him to give me a few minutes to explain everything that happened, but my husband gave me deaf ears and didn't give me his attention. At some point, he got up and told me that he was stepping out to get something, and when he came back, he didn't want to meet me at home. Tony said that, and then he walked out. I was scared about what he told me. After seeing what he did at the party, I became scared of Tony. I packed my luggages but still waited for him to come back. I thought maybe he would have calmed down when he returned. After a few hours, my husband came back home. I even went as far as making him his favorite meal to make him forgive me. I did that anytime I offended him, and he usually forgave me, just that this one was totally different. I thought doing that would ease his mind and calm him down. But guys, when Tony came inside, I quickly brought the food I made to the dining table. When he saw me, he asked what I was still doing in his house. I knelt down and pleaded with him and told him how sorry I was. Tony walked up to the dining table and flew the plate of food I made for him. I saw how angry he was at that moment, so I started shaking because I was so scared. I thought he would beat me up like the way he did to Roy at the party, but instead, my husband dragged me up and chased me out of the house and locked the door. Not long after that, he threw my things outside and told me never to show up at his place again and that I would be hearing from his lawyer soon. My husband didn't allow me to say anything, and he slammed the door at my face. I knocked on the door and asked Tony if he could let me spend the night because it was already late at that time, but my husband refused and didn't open up for me. At that moment, I didn't know what to do. All attempts to make my husband open the door for me failed, and I had nowhere to go or who to run to for help. I'm currently staying at a friend's place. I'll stop here for today, but I'll update you all as soon as I can. Update. Hi everyone, I'm here to give you guys an update about everything that happened after my husband learned about my infidelity. Well, a lot happened, and I already gave the sneak peek at the beginning of the first update, but I'll say everything in detail now. Tony sent me out and made it clear that he didn't want to set his eyes on me again. We are officially divorced and have gone our separate ways. Yes, I got nothing tangible from the divorce. He also didn't waste time to retrieve all that he got for me when we were still together. Just like I said in the first update, he seized the salon space and sold everything I had in the store at a discounted price. When I learned about it, I got furious. I had to go over to the salon to see things for myself. It was there I saw that the salon was permanently closed and the space was put up for rent. Tony made sure that nothing from the salon was given to me. He bought the place for me, so he had control of the paper, and it was his name that was on all the documents. I bursted into tears when I was told all things were sold out without my consent. I got most of the things inside the salon all by myself, so it was very painful. I still can't believe Tony sold all my stuff and didn't give me a penny out of it. I couldn't ask him why he did that or go close to the salon because I was so scared that he could beat me up just like he did to Roy. I had never seen Tony that angry in my life, so I was scared of what he could do. I know you all would be wondering what happened between Roy and I, right? Well, nothing much happened. After that incident, I went over to meet Roy and apologized to him for not telling him about my marital status in hopes that he would continue dating me. But Roy was very upset with me. He also warned me to stay away from him because he didn't want to have anything to do with me, especially after knowing what Tony was capable of doing. I told Roy that Tony and I were getting a divorce after that incident, and that we were no longer together, but Roy said he still doesn't want to be with a liar and a cheater. Roy told me he had no desire to date a woman that cheated while married and also cheated while dating him. He even chased me out of his house and called me cheap. I was so angry that day that I regretted even going to see him. Even now I can't stop but think about all the things Roy said to me. It pierced me so hard that I start crying anytime I remember it. I really regret cheating on my husband, and I also regret starting up a relationship with Roy. He is the biggest mistake I have ever made, and I hope never to make the same mistake twice.